Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle, and in this video I want to do a wrap-up of what I read for Historathon, plus I'm going to give you a few extras. So this is the very last day of February, and I'm clearing the decks, as it were, for March Mystery Madness. I've made a decision. I am only reading mysteries for the whole month of March, so there's some things here that I wanted to do a video about and let you know what I read before we head into March, because that's coming up very, very soon. Alright, so let's just get straight into this. I did a couple buddy reads in February that were so much fun, and the first was a buddy read for a book that I chose for Historathon, and that's The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. I buddy read this with Carolyn from Carolyn's Reading Ramblings. I'm going to include her channel below. She hasn't been making very videos recently, but she is really active on Instagram. And so we had a great time reading this together. This is a historical fiction. It's, I would say, kind of maybe more like dual timelines. So in the present day, we have Carrie, who is a writer, and she is writing a historical fiction about the first failed invasion, like the first failed Jacobite invasion in Scotland in 1708. And so she heads over to Scotland to visit the area, and she's going to stick around and write the book there for inspiration. And then throughout the book you get her story of what it's like for her and who she meets, and then you also get the book that she's reading. It just kind of seamlessly that she's writing, it seamlessly flows into that book, and you get that story and you learn about those characters. And it was really good. I mean, Susanna Kearsley is a great writer. She is really easy to read. I got along with her writing style really, really well. It was a big book. It's a little over 500 pages. So it's a commitment, but it's totally worth it. It was really, really interesting. I loved all the characters in both timelines. I was really invested in the story, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I read this one for, initially it was just going to be for a book set during winter, but because I didn't get to as many books as I thought I might, I've also included it for a multi-generational book and a book about a war that is not World War II. So you can see from my bingo card here, I did pretty well actually by putting multiple prompts to books. So if you've never read Susanna Kearsley, I would totally give her a whirl. She's a lot of fun, great historical fiction. And you know, there's a little bit of romance, and it was really good. This book in particular was all about fate and destiny, and that was really fun. So the opening sentence is, "It wasn't chance. There wasn't any part of it that happened just by chance." So yeah, that was a real big success. And then I also read Smoke and Ashes by Abir Mukherjee. This was for 2 prompts. This was for a book by a diverse author and a historical fiction subgenre. This is a historical mystery. This is the 3rd in a series actually, and it's a series that I really, really like. They're set in India in 1921, and Captain Sam Wyndham, by this time in the book, he's only been in India for about a year. He is British, and he fought during World War I, and he is still suffering trauma from that, and so he gets sent over to India, and he is a police officer in India. So this is still during the time of the Raj. This book in the series was fantastic. First of all, I love this series. I love the writing of Abir Mukherjee. They are so interesting with fascinating characters, and he includes such interesting historical detail. And so in this book, a huge part of the story is the peaceful protests that were encouraged by Gandhi at the time, and the effect that they had on the city of Calcutta, which is where this is set. So that part was really, really interesting. It's set over Christmas time, 1921, and so it also includes the visit of Prince Edward he was making a tour in India and he visited Calcutta, and so that also plays a huge part of this story. So that was really, really interesting, like all of the protests by the Indian people who I think rightly so, you know, wanted Britain to go away. And but what I like about this book is that the author fully recognizes that nothing is simple and nothing is easy, and so the quandaries that Sam finds himself in, and trying to understand what is right and what is the best way to do things and to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And his sergeant, Sir, and I can never say his actual name correctly, Sarandesh, possibly. His nickname is Surrender Not, which is great. And he's also experiencing his own moral quandaries, because he is an Indian police officer at a time when his family and friends think that he should be resigning that and standing up for Indian people, and yet he firmly believes that there needs to be Indian police officers on the Indian police force, and so he's really struggling. So there was a lot of really, really interesting things in here, aside from just a really good, solid historical mystery. I wanted to read the opening paragraph of this too, because it was so good. It's not unusual to find a corpse in a funeral parlor. It's just rare for them to walk in the door under their own steam. It was a riddle worth savoring, but I didn't have the time, seeing as I was running for my life. That's good, right? Yeah, very, very good. Okay, and then I ended up reading a book that wasn't on my TBR, but I needed to read it from the library. I initially thought it was mystery, but it's historical fiction, and so it fits for a few of the prompts. And this is A Summer in the Twenties by Peter Dickinson. Peter Dickinson writes a series of mysteries with Superintendent Pribble, which I really enjoy. This one was originally published in the 80s, in the early 80s. And this one is all about the summer of 1926. And the British government is worried about revolution. There is a massive strike that takes place in that summer. And it's all about the main character, Tom, who comes from an aristocratic family, but maybe is starting to question some of the truth behind why the strikers are striking. And he also kind of gets involved a little bit in some of the communist question. He meets some people. He just starts to have a lot of his preconceived notions questioned, and he also meets it's kind of about him choosing between two different women that he falls for. And I really enjoyed this ended up being a really slow read for me, even though it was really short, but it was fascinating. It was a really interesting time period, and it brought up really interesting questions, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I read this for a book set in a place you have visited, because it's set in England, and I visited England. It's set primarily in Yorkshire, which I never got to, but I would love to visit one day. But it is set partially in Oxford, and I have been to Oxford, so I'm going to count it for that. And also for a book with no people on the cover. Another book that I had intended to read was Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, and I've started it, but I am only 28 pages in, so I'm going to put this down and pick it up again in April. This is a historical fiction about the plague. It is set during the year of 1666, and so I'm still really interested to read this, but I'll have to wait now until after March Mystery Madness. So I read a couple other things that sort of fit with Historathon, but I needed to talk about. And so this was a buddy read that I did with Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf. I'll link to her channel in the description box below. This is House of Treason by Robert Hutchinson. This is a history, it's a nonfiction, a history about the Howard family, and it was fascinating. So the tagline is The Rise and Fall of a Tudor Dynasty. So he's writing about the Dukes of Norfolk, and he starts with the first Duke, and that's King Henry VII. And then we go through up until, I think the book ends with the 4th Duke, and that's during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And so it was just a really fascinating look at that family and how power hungry they were, and how many of them in, you know, subsequent generations were tried and possibly executed for treason. It happened a lot. I mean, 2 of the wives of Henry VIII were Howard girls. They were from that family. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. I believe it was those 2. I think so. But anyway, like, it was just really interesting to take a look at that family. And I also really enjoyed taking a look at the Tudor time period, which I'm somewhat familiar with, you know, looking at the reign of Henry VIII primarily, but through a different lens, looking at it through the eyes of this family. So that was really interesting. There was a couple things in here that I wanted to share with you. So one was, this story was so funny. So this man, he's the secretary of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cranmer, and Cranmer had a letter that he needed delivered urgently to the king. And this is the story. So this is primary source material. This is the story that was told. That he faced an alarming emergency en route. Here it is. Some others that were with him in the wherry needed to go to the Southwark side to look at the bear baiting that was near the river where the king was in person. The bear broke loose into the river with the dogs after her. Those who were in the boat leapt out and left the poor secretary alone. But the bear got into the boat with the dogs about her and sank it. The secretary, apprehending that his life was in danger, did not mind his book, which he lost in the water. But being quickly rescued and brought to land, he began to look for his book and saw it floating on the river. Well, that book was like really important to get to the king or something. But seriously, you're in a boat on the River Thames and a bear gets into it? Like, that was so funny. All right. And so then this chapter is about the 2nd Duke of Norfolk, and yeah, he gets, of course, arrested for treason, and he's in the Tower of London, and at some point he thinks that an escape is possibly a good idea, and so he actually tries to escape through the garderobe, or like basically the bathroom shaft that, like, yeah, so that's disgusting. It didn't work, but gross. And then this same man, so he was arrested, and he spent years in the Tower, but because of timing, he was never actually executed. And then he was still there as a prisoner when Queen Mary came to the throne, and as a Catholic, she recognized someone who would be in her corner, and so she let him out, and so he ended up dying in his own home. And I thought this was a really apt description. Norfolk died in his bed on the 25th August 1554 at Kenninghall. There were many who would say there was no justice in his peaceful end, but after all his conspiracies, intrigue, and the tumult of his life, he ended up the great survivor. That's totally true. Okay, and then a couple more. I ended up doing a very last minute join in with Jane, the sampler girl. She has a monthly book club, and this was the book that was being read in February, and I couldn't resist a reread of my absolute favorite Jane Austen, and so I read Persuasion along with that group, and that was really fun. We chatted about it on Instagram. I love Persuasion. It is such a good story, and like I said, my favorite Jane Austen. And so Anne Elliot is the main character, and her father is a baronet and super prideful of his position in society, but they are running out of money and they need to retrench, and so he is trying to come to terms with having to let his house to someone else. And I love this sentence. It makes me so, it made me laugh out loud. So he's trying to come to terms with what it will mean to let his house. And he says, "As to all that," rejoined Sir Walter coolly, "supposing I were induced to let my house, I have by no means made up my mind as to the privileges to be annexed to it. I'm not particularly disposed to favor a tenant. The park would be open to him, of course, and few Navy officers or men of any other description can have had such a range. But what restrictions I might impose on the use of the pleasure grounds is another thing. I am not fond of the idea of my shrubberies being always approachable." Oh, Jane Austen is awesome. Okay, and then finally I read A Lady Compromised by Darcie Wilde. This is the fourth in a series, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but this is a historical mystery series set in the Regency time period, and I love it. It is such a good series. It's got great characters, good mysteries, but what I love the most is how much the rules of society are such a key part of this series, and it's so fascinating. So class and reputation and the rules of society, and in the Regency time period there were a lot of rules, and it just makes for such fascinating stories, fascinating conflicts. Yeah, I highly recommend this series. So if you've never read Darcie Wilde's Rosalind Thorne series, you might want to give it a try. They are really, really well done and really, really interesting mysteries. Alright, so that is it for me. I have cleared the deck and I am all set for March Mystery Madness. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye!